evening. Welcome to the Cabarrus County Board of Education work session. Today is Monday, November 4th, 2019. I'll call the meeting to order. Board members, I'll take a motion to set the agenda as presented.
Second.
Mr. Harrison made the motion. Mr. Walter made the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes 7-0. I'd like to thank Deputy Luke Zabo from Northwest Cabarrus High School, School Resource Officer, for being here with us tonight. And we will go into agenda item 3.01 with Ms. Reimer and Mrs. Burns for the policies. Which one's first? Who on first read? Okay. Yeah. 3240 on 4204 animals for instructional purposes. We had a slight change to this to define venomous, and we removed the exclusion of live baby poultry in the classroom. Policy 5070, 7350, public records retention, release, and distribution. Updates section F pertaining to the destruction of records and updates the legal references. Policy 7100, recruitment and selection of personnel. This clarifies the meaning of convicted of a criminal offense, adds a new section in section E to address criminal history background checks, and updates legal references. Okay, board members, let's start with the first policy on the list, the animals for instructional purposes. Any questions or comments on that one? No, is that okay for consent agenda? Okay. Next policy, public records retention, release, and distribution. Any questions or comments? The consent agenda? Consent? I'm looking for a head nod. Yes. Thank you. And the third one, on first reading, recruitment and selection of personnel. Any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I do have a question. And I actually just discussed this with Ms. Jones, so I'll preface that with my email issues that everybody knows I've had. So I had a question regarding reciprocating licensure, and it not being a real local decision.
Right.
If you can answer that, please.
So licensure in the state of North Carolina is set by North Carolina General Assembly, and then the State Board of Education actually puts the law into policy. So reciprocity is never a local decision. It's always guided by legislation and state board policy.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So are we okay on 7100 for consent? Yes? Okay. So Mindy, all three will be for consent then. Next, we'll move on to 3.02 for the policy revisions for approval on second reading. Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. We have not had any questions on these two. I think Ms. Grimsley may have a question on one here in a second, because she just again mentioned to me about her email issues. But other than that, we've had nothing. These two were on first read last month. Okay, so let's look at 2500 first, hearings before the board.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So I do have an issue with only the chair and vice chair having total authority to decide what comes before the board. I didn't even realize that had been changed since I've been on the board. And not that I don't trust, but I feel like if we have a policy that staff or whomever has followed to file a grievance, it's the least that we could do to have that heard before the board. And I know there's been a couple of times for different reasons that we have changed decisions that staff's made and made a different decision.
Yeah, which section?
Where you're
I'm sorry, just the whole right there.
In section 1?
What you're reading before you, right there. Section 1, in the red, will be made by the board chairperson and vice chairperson.
Yeah, but that's
in
the final
consultation.
determination of whether or not a hearing will be held in open or closed session.
So so that I didn't read it like that. I read it that they would make the decision whether it came before the board. So where do you see that it says that, whether it's an open or closed session? I see that it says, okay, if that's very clear, let me read out loud. It doesn't read that to me. I mean, I guess it could.
Your question, there's another section that's deal with your question.
So there is nowhere that it says that the board chairperson and vice chairperson make the decision?
That's in section 4.
Okay.
Again, keep in mind, whenever that does happen, doesn't happen very often,
it is at the attorney's guidance. So we don't make a decision without guidance. We get the guidance.
Well, I understand that, but I still have an issue with that. I would prefer if someone, whomever that is, staff person, just whomever, has went through the process to be heard. I feel like that it should come before the whole board, or our committee of the board, at least.
Mrs. Furtball, can I give an example real quick? So, for example, a lot of times our policy that speaks to grievances is very broad and says that if a parent feels as though a decision made by any administrator is negatively impacting their student, then the board may hear that appeal, may, not necessarily will. So, for example, a short-term suspension of 1 day. We have parents that appeal or try to grieve a suspension of 1 day for whatever. In this policy, written the way it does now, allows our board attorney to work with our chair and vice chair to say, first of all, that's not appealable. It's really not an appealable offense, even though the policy is vague. If you had to have the board hear every time a parent or someone complained about a 1 day suspension, or maybe in CNI it's a grade that they don't really have the authority to change. In my mind, that's how we've worked. Those are the times that I think Mr. Shaw and I have worked on. So if you work with the board chair and vice chair, it's about a situation which is really not appealable, but because our other policy is so broad, those are the only times I'm aware that that's really taking place. And Brian could probably speak to those as well, because he and I work closely on that.
Well, before he does that, let me just clarify. So I'm not saying when it initially starts, when y'all give advice, that it's not appealable. I'm saying when they file the grievance. So maybe that's the verbiage that needs to be looked at. If they've met all the criteria that they can appeal something or file the grievance and it meets board policy, that's the situation I'm talking about.
Well, I think parents can continue to appeal. And just for clarification, Ms. Grimsley, I don't believe we've ever not heard a staff grievance with that clause. It's only been these where no policy was broken. There's basically not an appealable item because of the vagueness of the policy, where it says may, you may appeal or whatever. Those are the ones that the attorney will usually recommend after a thorough review of what policies may have been broken or not implemented successfully. But it has been from the student side, not a staff grievance.
So, I mean, I don't know that we would be able to or could, I guess Brian would have to answer this, that we would put in there that it would only reference staff. I just have a real issue that if somebody has filed a grievance and if they've met the criteria, that it would definitely come to us as a board and not be decided upon a couple of different people. I mean, I don't really care who chair and vice chair would be at that time. I'm just saying I just don't like that idea that we would not collectively make that decision if they've went through the process to do that.
Could you scroll down the rest of the policy just to see whether there's anything here about that? I know we have a provision like that, but it might be in the grievance policy.
It is in the grievance.
What the grievance
So
policy...
can we reference the grievance policy in that, and so that we're real clear that that would not take place? I won't support it if we don't change it.
Student and Parent Grievance Procedure Policy 1740. That's where I thought it was, but I just wanted to remind myself. That policy basically says that if a person files a grievance and alleges a violation of federal law, state regulations, school board policy, then they're entitled to a hearing before the board. Entitled. But if they do not allege a violation of any policy or law, then the question is, should the board hear all those? And the theory generally is, if there's no violation of law under site-based management, you let and your administrator, you let them make that decision and give them some deference as long as there's no violation of law. But just to catch those rare circumstances where there might be something, it just doesn't feel right, or the board really wants to get involved, that's when Rob and Cindy have the discretion to give an appeal hearing, even though there's no violation of law alleged.
So it's not the policy before us tonight?
It's not the policy before us tonight.
Okay.
The one before us tonight just dealt with an open, whether the hearing is going to be open or closed.
And Mrs. Grimsley, perhaps in our next closed session, Mr. Shaw can share a couple of those examples. Like I said, it hasn't happened very often, and when it does, it's kind of an extraordinary circumstance.
And the practice is, I'll say, here's a grievance. It does not appear to violate any law or policy. They're not alleging a violation, and therefore, there's no right to an appeal. It's up to you, Rob, and Cindy under the policy. I recommend no, but it's your call. That's basically how it goes. And if they look at it and say, yeah, this is something we should look at as a board, they can do it.
Well, you generally add more than that with the reason why.
I give a reason why. I give a copy of the complaint so they can review it. There was one fairly recently. There was a video, and they had a chance to review a video. One reason that I generally recommend no is because the more you give on a discretionary basis, then somebody who's denied a hearing starts saying, wait, I was denied for a discriminatory reason. You allowed Mrs. Jones a hearing, you didn't allow me a hearing, it's because I fit in this protected category. So I would rather have those hearings be reserved for when there's a violation of law or when there's really something that's just looks pretty unfair and pretty egregious. And that's where we rely on the chair and the vice chair.
Well, that's where I was actually going. I wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be a situation that somebody would say, you know, you've got two people making a decision, and what criteria do they use versus one case versus the other? That's what I really did
Sure.
want to avoid, and that was where I was going with that. So I would like whatever policy that, I guess 1740 or 50, what,
We can
that
bring
one,
that
I
up
want
at
that-
the
yes.
policy committee and
That
talk
would be
that
great.
through.
Yeah, and I would actually, before it goes to policy committee, I would like us to have perhaps a little discussion next week in closed session.
We can do that and then
just
see whether we want to
kind
go.
of understand, because I think that change happened after 2012 when we weren't on the board. I didn't originally understand it, but now I do, seeing some of the situations.
Okay, so just get it to us in closed session.
Yeah, we can talk about it or have Brian update us on the thought process.
What, I don't have the calendar. What is the date of the next,
12th, November 12th,
that's the board meeting?
next Tuesday.
And is policy committee the week after that? So there's time to get on the policy committee after next week then?
Yeah, yeah. And then I think we will have a vote on that, whether we want to do that or not. So, okay, so for the purposes of the second reading of this particular policy, 2500, can we put this one on consent? Consent. Okay. And then 4150, the school assignment transfers and program choice enrollment. Any questions or comments on that one?
So again, that gives you more flexibility to add students into programs that otherwise are restricted to ninth grade. Is that
Yes, sir, in our academies.
So is the controlling factor the need of the program, or all the different factors are kind of equal? I mean, the policy references the needs of the program, but not limited to the capacity and the ability to have, full set of students in the classroom. Is there a series of criteria, or is it primarily the needs of the program?
It's really the needs of our students. So I think Alan Shemansky's done a really good job of evaluating our programs and making suggestions to change so that our 10th grade students can now enter into a program. We do have seats and capacities in some of those areas, so it works well for our families and students. The change to IB was based on West Cabarrus High School and the specific program they're going to have there, and being allowed, again, on the side of allowing students some flexibility as well.
Okay, any other questions on policy 4150? Are we okay with consent agenda?
yes?
Yes, okay. So those will be on consent as well. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 4.01, the approval of a roof bid. We'll welcome Mr. Louder and Mr. Taylor. Yep, you're both coming.
Good evening, board members. Dr. Louder. Facilities Maintenance Department's here tonight to ask you for your approval to move forward with the roofing bid. That's a base bid that will bring the Mount Pleasant Elementary School roof to current code, and it will also include a alternate for a catwalk maintenance safety and also for fall protection in the alternates. Any questions?
Can you walk through and just tell us, because if we're sorting through these numbers, are you taking any alternates?
Yes, ma'am.
What are you
That's
recommending?
alternate number 2 and number 3. That will be the catwalk and the fall protection. Both of these are huge safety items for the maintenance.
And which is the winning bid, the top one?
The very last one, ma'am, $961,087.
Okay, on the bottom, okay.
Low base and low after the alternate.
Mike, get on the mic.
They were the low base and also the low bidder after alternates were added.
Okay, because you really have to go out with low base, or the combination of what you're accepting?
It's the combination, ma'am.
Is this someone we've worked with? Are you familiar with these people? Do you know, I mean,
They're actually new to us, but not new to the area or the region, and we have done a check on them as far as background and done some reference checks. They're a very reputable company.
okay. Where are they located at?
They're out of Charlotte, ma'am. So
They're
they
out
are
of
local.
Charlotte? Okay, thank you.
I know Mount Pleasant Elementary has waited a long time for this. So.
Yes, they have.
Well, why would we not want to save another $300,000 on taking the alternative 1?
So the reason for that alternate is because of the bid climate that we've gone through. That would not bring the roof to current code as far as R value and R factor, and given the fact the age of the school was built in 1972, and it's not on your 10-year plan anywhere, so we know it's going to be around for a while. We want to bring that up to code if we can. We need to give these guys and the school and the facility as much life as possible.
Okay, so your logic was if these bids were too high, that was a way to reduce it? Is that-
This was a strategy to deal with it. The company's coming in too high. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Is this all within the budget we have?
Yes, ma'am, and a little left over.
Good boy. If that's the case, I'd like to say we go for it. I'd put it on consensus, whatever we gotta do.
It is the rainy season.
And this need has been on the budget request for several years now, hasn't it?
It has been on the budget request since I came to work here.
Well, since there's so many of these companies, I'd like to see it on action next week in case somebody has some issue that we don't know about.
Yeah, I would like to always put contracts on action anyways, just. Okay, any other questions on the roof replacement? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And next we'll have 4.02, and Mr. Lauder and Mr. Cohn will share with us the recommendation for the middle school construction manager at risk.
As Mr. Cohn walks up to present with Mr. Lauder, I'd like to publicly thank both of them for their effort in facilitating this construction manager at risk process. And I'd also like to acknowledge some people here at the table, the 3 board members that participate on the construction committees. That's Ms. Grimsley, Mr. Shoemaker, and Mr. Harrison. Not only are you board members and work full-time jobs, but you also take the time out to serve on this committee. So I appreciate that. Thank you for your time and your input in the process. And I will say the process resulted in a recommendation that was arrived at with great ease. So I think we had a great process, and I appreciate the 2 gentlemen before you, and as well as the construction committee. With that, Brian and Tim.
Thank you. We're very happy to enter into this process. It's something new for us as far as delivery to the schools themselves, but this construction manager at risk should have a lot of advantages for us. No surprises on bid day. Bringing the CM at risk firm on board now allows us to be able to work with the architect to do value engineering prior to bidding rather than afterward, because sometimes afterward you get 80 cents on the dollar if you're lucky. And so we're looking forward to doing that. We also are looking forward to working with them to quantify or qualify the subcontractors that we can get, so we make sure that our subcontractors were sometimes on bid day, they're not quite so qualified, but they're low bid, so they get taken. So it allows us to eliminate that issue that we seem to be having sometimes where we can't get contractors to show up to the job and causes some scheduling issues, if you will. But I want to congratulate Brian, did a great job on laying this one out. We took a lot of lead from the Cabarrus County, who actually is doing this process on the courthouse, and they highly recommended that we look at this, and we were very happy to do that. With that being said, we got 10 proposals. We narrowed it, the selection committee narrowed it down to 3. Then we held interviews, and at the end of those interviews, we all had our negotiations and came together on one firm. We chose to ask to allow us to go into contract. Once you do that, then of course Brian will work with our attorneys to work out that contract language so they can enter the contract. So right now, we were asking you to approve us entering the contract with Shellco, Incorporated out of Charlotte, North Carolina.
We're not voting tonight. No, it's an action item for next week. So any other questions or comments? So I have a question. I just want to know how this works kind of mechanically. So Shellco is hired as effectively the GC, construction manager at risk. If they have other divisions of their company who want to bid on some portion or be a sub for, I guess there's no subs at this point, right? They're all bidding for the whole piece of work?
Yes, so the construction manager at risk operates under the same umbrella that a general contractor operates. It's just the hiring process is different than in a hard bid market. So the statute allows us to go out and choose the construction manager on a qualification-based service as opposed to a hard bid service. So they're going to pre-qualify subcontractors with a minimum of 3 bids per scope of work, just like they would receive bids in a hard bid delivery method.
Okay, so when we have bids, you know, there's always that, are we over, under on our estimated cost?
Right.
So how does that work now with a construction manager at risk?
So we'll go through 3 pre-construction exercises with Shellco Construction.
Okay.
So we have a schematic design or design development drawing that Shellco will then take, and they'll do an initial pre-construction estimate for us. So we'll know very early on, are we landing where we think we're going to be landing, or are we way off? If we know that early on that we're way off, then we go back to the design team, and we work with the construction manager at risk firm as well, and we try to make modification, whether it's means and methods. Do we change construction types? Do we change materials? You know, we go through those exercises 3 times before we get to where they actually put the job out to bids for the pre-qualified subcontractors.
Okay, so it was a good segue because you said the pre-qualified bids. So they're coming in, the subs are coming in with a certain amount of money that they're saying, I can do this work for.
No, so Shellco will put a bid package together on the scope of work. So we're just going to take electrical, for instance. They'll have X amount of items included in the electrical scope of work. Site lighting, the building package, you know, your alarm systems, things like that. So that will be in that scope of work, and they'll put it out to subcontractors that, one, they've pre-qualified and have worked with before, and if we have, you know, we'll have the option to review those bid packages and who those pre-qualified subs are. If we feel like there's one of those subs that, you know, didn't do so well for us in the past, then we have the liberty to say, well, we're not sure that that's who we want to use.
Is there potential of having a bid from a sub who is actually another division of Shellco?
In some cases, you can do that.
Okay, so then I'm wondering, when you talk about all the bids are open on bid day in the old way, how can we ensure there's confidentiality between the construction manager at risk and any divisions from his or her company?
We'll know very early on if that is the case, because we'll know who those subcontractors are, because we'll have gone through that pre-qualification process with them. So we know what subs they're going to be using to pre-qualify and has to bring a bid to the table.
And
And
then
they
you'll
would-
handle that differently?
Madam
or-
Chair, I'll answer that, because I
Okay.
think, Brian, where you're going with that is they have to disclose that.
Correct.
So that has
Yes.
to be disclosed on bid day.
Okay.
So we would know that.
And their
Okay,
bid
and
is
then
also
someone else
open.
has to receive the bids?
The bids would come in front of us, and we would, those bids.
They
would
come
be
into
open.
you? Okay, that's what we know.
And
Make
the
sure there was
construction
a,
and the construction manager.
manager as well.
Yeah.
But all three packages will lay on the desk. If one is from a division within their company, two others, or maybe three others, they would all come together, all open at that one time, everything's out in the open. Whoever was low, if their
Okay.
division was low, then they.
that's
may
why I
do
want to
it.
make sure that there was not a conflict of interest. When you use
And
this
also, under
process.
this delivery method, the statute reads that the construction manager at risk firm cannot self-perform any of the work on the job unless they justify due hardship in one, either not being able to receive a bid on that scope of work, or the price point of what came in as the bid is higher than the value that they've established for that scope.
Okay.
Then they have the liberty to say, well, we can self-perform it for X amount of dollars less, and then we have the liberty to allow them to do that.
Okay, that's good.
Okay?
Are we likely to use construction manager at risk, that process or that approach in the future? Are we likely to take this approach a few more times in the current economy, the way it seems for the foreseeable
I think
future?
we'll strongly consider it, yes, sir.
Can we kind of document some of this process? I don't mean to raise it to a policy or something, but y'all have got to educate us every time we talk about, and you know, and many of y'all, and Mr. Shoemaker certainly, but I'd like a clearer understanding of this approach that we need to have in our head. Certainly, I need to get educated more clearly on it for future consideration of the process.
Absolutely. We think we're hoping this will be a really good process for us. If it's not, then we'll obviously go back to hard bid. Fort Mill, South Carolina uses a combination, depending on what they feel like the climate or the size of the project. They have some hard bids, they have some construction manager at risk, especially with projects that are a little complicated. Construction manager at risk obviously works a little bit better, pretty straightforward projects like Chuck's roofing project, that's pretty straightforward. That's obviously a hard bid situation. You wouldn't want to do anything like that. But the CMS is all construction manager at risk, right? The CMS is as well. That's what they do. They feel like that's their best delivery method because they can control the scope and the timing and the subs that work in the project.
And I guess I'm just thinking of some document that we can refer to in the future that lays out what y'all been talking about over the last 6 months.
We can give you a timeline process and show you what's at each step.
How about we add it to construction standards?
We can do that.
You know, I can't, yeah.
Good plug.
Yeah, I think I don't think we have to go into the whole standards for this part. I think.
But
let's
there
just be
is a policy that talks about all this process, doesn't it? It's 9115. So it says we're supposed to designate a school pre-qualification official. Who is that going to be? Who's that?
That would be Brian.
That would be Brian? Okay. And then there's something about an application?
Right? That was quick, Tim.
Can we do it together?
Yeah, we do it.
Okay, so this item.
There's an application process, I guess, and that must be approved by the school pre-qualification official. So is there already an application process, or how's that?
As a construction manager at risk, they will ask for subs to send in qualification packages, and then we will go over that with.
I just want you all to be aware, there is a policy, so let's make sure we're aware of this policy and we're following the policy, that's all.
Your director of construction will be on that committee to select that with the CM at risk firm to determine whether those are qualified or not before we bid it. Of course, I'll work with them as well.
Okay, any other comments? This will be on action next week. Okay, and just a reminder that our meeting will be on Tuesday next week, not on Monday, because Monday is the Veterans Day holiday. So at this point, we are finished with our agenda. Amazing. So I will take a motion that the meeting be adjourned. Mrs. Carpenter made the motion. Mr. Harrison made the second. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. No, I'm not acknowledging you, Mr.